Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Mentor Minutes board gaming podcast. I'm your host, Jared.
And I am Jay, co-host.
And I am the main host, Jared. And
I'm the minor host.
Major, minor.
Senior, junior, whatever works.
So we're a board gaming podcast. We like to do a lot of top 10 lists. We talk about board game topics. We interview game designers and all sorts of stuff like that.
Yep.
We are associated with the YouTube channel, Meeple Mentor, which is dedicated to making tutorial videos for those heavier or more complex games, fully detailed and thorough. Plus, every other Friday, we have news on the YouTube channel, as well as simultaneously streaming to the podcast, so you can always get your news feed from wherever you are.
That's right. Yeah. Plus, a lot of unboxings and just a lot of other great
There's
content.
A lot of other content
check
on
it
there
out
too. So go subscribe, and thank you for listening to today's episode. And today we're doing something a little different than our normal fare. So Jay, do you want to introduce what we're going to talk about?
Yeah. So, we're taking a little bit of a break from top 10 lists and some designer interviews, and we're going to talk about one specific topic, and that's we'll discuss that afterwards.
Okay.
And then we're going to lead off with just talking about some games that we've both discovered recently, played recently, that were
played new.
Yeah, they're new in general, or maybe we haven't played in a while. So just to give you an idea of what those are and what we thought about them.
Can I give you a quick overview on what we've been playing recently? And then once we kind of go through some of that, I want to talk a little bit more on an in-depth topic that a lot of people ask me about, particularly because of the tutorials that I do on the channel, which is, how do you teach a game, or how do you prefer to teach board games, and what's the best way to do that? So I'll put that at the end of the second half of the episode.
Yeah, sounds great.
So, Jay, do you want to kick us off? I know you've got quite a bit of a list here. You've been playing a lot of new games.
Just looking at sort of BG stats and what I've played that's been new to me, within the past, say, 2 months maybe. First one on the list is a game called Caravan. And this is a game that didn't really get a lot of buzz. Came out a couple years ago. The box cover has a couple camels on it. And
that kind of caravan.
Yeah, that kind of caravan. And it's funny because in the spelling of the word caravan, the R is actually like a camel's head. So there's been a lot of like fun topics about that on BGG. But this is really just, a very, very basic abstract pick up and deliver game. It's fun. I played it 2 players. I definitely think it will shine at a larger player count because basically you have this board that's a grid. You have 8 different types of goods that are just really different colored cubes that are on this grid, and you have 5 camels, and you're basically moving camels to spots. You have 4 actions on your turn. And, you can place a camel, you can move a camel, you can pick up a good, those are just very simple actions, super simple, or deliver the good. The interesting thing about the game, and I think what makes this kind of a little bit more clever, than just a very plain pick up and deliver, is once you've placed the camel and picked up a good on the spot you're standing on, that camel can never move. So it can't move until either the good is stolen by another player, or you've delivered it. And the way you deliver it is you have to make a consecutive orthogonal chain of camels leading to the delivery spot.
Make a caravan.
Yes, and then once you've and sometimes you can't physically reach that spot within 5 camel spaces.
Right.
So you have to actually, for an action, you can move that good anywhere along that caravan and then let it sit on top of another camel in the line.
Oh, okay.
So that's how you can kind of sort of inch your way across the board. But everybody starts out with this thief token. And so you can actually land your camel on somebody else's spot for two actions, steal their good, which then goes below, like between your camel's legs. It can't then be stolen at all. And then you pass your little steal token to the player you stole from.
Okay.
And so then you can't steal again. The rest of the game, but the person you stole from now can steal twice. So you kind of pass these, thief tokens around.
So after you've lost that thief token and someone steals from you, then you get that token.
Then you get it back. Yeah.
You get to steal again.
Yeah. So it kind of makes sure that, one player can't just can just steal people's stuff. And if you've
That's kinda
gotten
cool.
yeah, if you've gotten picked on by a couple players, well, now all of a sudden you can steal 3 things in a row and can't get stolen from.
Mhm.
So it's a cool game. I think this game would shine. It plays actually up to 5 players, I believe, maybe 4. But I think at 3, 4, possibly 5 is where you're going to get in each other's way,
Mm.
and it's going to be a lot more fun. At 2, it was pretty much just an exercise in trying to be the most efficient, but it was still an enjoyable, really light game. One you could just sit down and play with just about anybody, and that's Caravan.
Very cool. That sounds fun.
Yeah, yeah. What about you?
So I've had a couple new games that I've played. One that I want to talk about that I don't think I've shared with before, but I played it again recently is The Hunger.
Yeah,
And that's Richard Garfield's game. I did play it back at the Mace Con in October. It's October?
Yeah, I think it's when you told me about it. Yep.
And The Hunger is very similar to Clank, a deck building game where you are vampires and there's one main track that you lead out from the castle, and after you leave the mountain section it goes into the plains and then the forest. There's also like a path that jets out into the sea that you can do, but as long as you're not in the sea you can hunt as part of your turn, and basically whatever unspent speed points, which are just the kind of general currency on your card, you use that to move and to hunt, and that's your purchase cost of whatever cards are in the display. There's a display that I think, depending on player count, it's like 4 or 5 cards, something like that, that are in each column of costs. So there's like a 3 speed cost, a 2 speed cost, and then the 1. But these slowly slide down, so they get cheaper. But the 1, if as things pile up, the 1 is sort of a catch-all. And so if you spend 1, you get every card that's in that section. So it depends. I mean, maybe a lot of bad cards are better than, a single good card at that point, right?
Okay.
I don't know, because these cards have not been chosen. And so that's kind of how that proceeds. Normally you get to do that once on a turn, unless you land on like certain well spots where you can do a free hunt action. But that extra action has to be from that 1 column.
Okay.
So there's also ways in the game where so some of the cards that you can get, and like there's vampire cards that add more to your movement and potential stuff that you can use. But then there's the human cards, which usually don't add any speed, and so they are essentially clogging up your deck. Sometimes they have abilities or sort of might be considered punishments, like a card that says like, oh, if this is in play, then you have to move 4 away from the castle, which at first is not that bad, but there's only 15 rounds, and that's when the sun comes up, so you actually have to make it back to the castle in order to like actually live.
Yeah.
In my first play of this back in October, like everybody lived minus 1 player because he got kicked out of like being just close enough to surviving. But in our last game, most recently, only 1 player survived.
Okay, and is it the kind of thing with like where Clank, where if you make it like past a certain point, you count points, but if you don't, you get 0 points, kind of thing?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah, you're dead. So none of your points mattered.
Okay. Okay.
But you get points throughout the game as well as at the end. And then, getting back to the castle first. If you get to the castle, you get a bonus point token, and then decreasing amount of point tokens for others that would come back. And depending on if you play on at normal mode or rookie mode, you can either just get to the mountain section and you're safe, or you have to get to the graveyard area, which is like 3 spaces in front of the castle or the castle. We were playing the normal mode, so even just making it to the mountains wasn't enough, and people were dying that way.
Okay.
So it's a little bit of that push your luck, because you're constantly seeing 15 turns where you got to go, and go explore the land, collecting and hunting humans, which have like a blood cost, or not cost, but a blood point value. But when you draw those cards, they usually don't really help you. And there's a way to digest humans, which essentially trashes the cards out of your deck.
That's hilarious.
But it's not out of the game because you'll still score them. And so it's basically you just place them out of the playing area or discard area into like just the bottom below your character board, and they're considered digested, and you don't have to carry them with you.
So you're not just like biting humans, you're eating humans. Is that?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
You're not just biting them. You're not converting them to vampires. You're devouring
just eating them. Okay.
And I guess the theme of like clogging your deck in this is that you're getting so full, you're like slowing down. You're like, oh, oh god, the sun's coming up and I'm about to barf.
That's pretty funny.
The hunger. I was too hungry.
That's funny. I've heard and I think you told me this too, that a lot of people have said that they even like this better than the original Clank.
Yeah, I think, for me, I actually do, but I understand why people wouldn't, or it's not your traditional deck building game.
Yeah.
Clank is that, and then it applies it to movement and on the board. But in this, because there's that push your luck element, and there's a lot of player interaction where when someone like lands on your piece, they can choose to bump you forward or backward a space, which can often screw you up a little bit. And in this game, you only draw 3 cards on your hand. And so the ability to draw extra cards is usually very difficult, and getting cards that let you do that can be tricky. And often it'll say like, oh, well, you can draw a card if there's a human in play. So one of your 3 would have to be a human, or you'd have to have a human in front of you that had like some kind of permanent ability that just stayed out, that stayed out. Like I had a human card that stayed out permanently until you get to a well. And basically while he's in front of you and face up, you have to move to the closest well, which could be behind you. And once you get to the well, then he goes into your discard pile again.
I mean, I think I'd really like this game. I love Clank, and it has that kind of same sort of a little bit of a pressure lock mechanism. I think I'd enjoy it too. So that really interested in playing this one.
Yeah, so I enjoyed it.
Very cool. Another one I've played recently. So I've talked before on the podcast about Lost Cities, the card game. It's my wife and one of her favorite games.
He mentions this like every other podcast.
Yeah, I do. It's a great game, and of course Reiner Knizia. So there you go. Well, I ended up I saw on sale a few weeks ago Lost Cities, the board game.
Ooh.
Yeah, and the card plays very much like Lost Cities in that when you start down an expedition, you have to play a card in a certain suit, and then every card after that has to be higher than the card you just played. Well, what this does is it adds, you have an exploration party, which I think you've got you have 5 meeples that are members of your expedition party, and there's these paths leading to different lost cities on the board. And each path is like a stepping stone, towards the city. So what you do is you play cards similar to Lost Cities, and the card, the suit determines which path you go down. But no matter what number you play, you only advance on that track 1 space. But the cool thing about this, and actually why I like this better than Lost Cities, is you have these additional tokens that you randomize and place on the paths. And so you might hit one and it has a token that lets you move forward another space, but you can then move any of your explorers a space. Or you can collect artifacts, which are used as like set collection at the end of the game. Or you can choose to just get points. There may be just random points on the board. And the further down the path you go, the more points you're going to get. And you also have one leader of your expedition who earns double points, depending on where you are in the path. So really familiar play when it comes to Lost Cities, but it really adds, to me, a much more interesting element of traversing down these paths. It makes the theme come alive a lot more. And sort of racing down paths is more significant because once 5 of explorers cross these bridges on the paths, that ends the round. So there's also this element of sort of racing in order to shut your opponent down from scoring extra points too. So really fun game, cool design, and definitely recommend, especially for families, Lost Cities, because unlike Lost Cities that plays 2 players, this game plays up to 4 players as well. So I think it's a cool game. Lost Cities, the board game.
Now, do you know how much the board game is compared to the original?
Yeah, so the card game is probably about $15, new. And I think the board game is usually anywhere from 40 to 50 because it's a, I was going to say Cosmos game. It's not, it's a Queen game, I believe. No, it's just Cosmos. But it's a pretty large production. But I think I pulled the trigger on it when it was on sale, for $30 or something like that. So definitely for me, if you can get it for $40 or less, it's worth it. Depending on your budget.
Yeah, I've played a couple familiar games to me recently. Like I played Terraforming Mars again, which is always great. Jurassic Parts, which is that area control type game where you're kind of cutting up the tiles, and as if you can make a clean break from the plot, then you get various dinosaur skeletons.
Yeah, that's a fun game.
Stuff. Yeah, it's pretty fun. It always surprised me how much of a longer game than it looks to be.
You're right. Yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, this will be 25 minutes maybe, and it's always like 45 minutes.
Yeah, unless you really collaborate to like split that board real fast.
Exactly. Because that's the thing. If you play with people like that are just going for like one or two little tiles at a time, then it's going to take a while to finish that game, because you can finish all the tiles.
Totally.
We did play Legends of Andor.
Yeah, you played this one with you. Yep.
Yeah, it was interesting. I think it came out a while ago, and it probably was a big deal when it came out. But for now, I felt it felt clunky to me.
Yeah, it's a family style campaign game
with like sort of a narrative.
With a narrative. It's got some sort of pandemic-like elements a little bit, where, there's sort of, if you've ever played Pandemic Fall of Rome, there's sort of these paths that monsters will sort of head down that reach this castle. Yeah, so, and a little bit of a Castle Panic vibe in that respect too. Yeah,
it's like Castle Attack. They're all like different. There's usually 3 types of creatures, and so they move following the arrows slowly towards the castle. Yeah. Sometimes, the paths get cut off, like the bridge collapses, so then everything funnels together. Yeah. But, in like one of the first missions, you have to carry this letter, and you can't move through an enemy.
Right.
And at that point, when everyone was just like in a line funneling into it, we were just like, okay, so how
basically based on our board position when that objective came out, there was no way we could possibly, beat that scenario.
Because one of the ways that advances the story or the gameplay of a scenario is anytime something dies it moves up. So not only does the little tracker move up at the end of like a round and the day when everyone's done, but anytime something dies, then it's like, well, if we kill everything, we're just going to lose. But if we don't kill everything, we're not going to move.
Right.
So we were kind of hosts.
Yeah. I found, again, we played just a little bit of it. I think, probably fun for families. I think you could play this with younger kids as well. At least, the first levels, which weren't really that difficult for us as far as
a lot of dice rolls.
Yeah, but it's a lot of dice rolling, fighting monsters, that kind of thing. So, if that's your jam, you might like it. But definitely not from what we experienced, wasn't a real gamery game, for an advanced sort of
so I think, it was pleasant to play. It wasn't like terrible to try or anything. I'm glad to try it.
Yeah, it was fine.
But it's not one I own. And
I don't think I'd pick this one up.
Yeah, I think he's probably willing to trade it at this point, having seen, just a little bit of how it flows.
Yeah. And I'd say as an alternative recommendation, there's a game called Adventureland, which has a similar kind of feel, but uses this grid mechanism. And I think that game's really good, and also a family weight game. So I would check
any of the Castle Panic type stuff too.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's always it's a similar feel, but without the narrative and some of the extra rules and clunky feeling that it's like, oh, well, we don't remember, or don't forget to do this, don't forget to do this, and advance your thing every time you move, and it's like...
Yeah, and if you play Castle Panic with even some of the expansions, it can be a real gamery game too.
Yeah.
And you can get to a pretty advanced type style.
And I don't know how much Legends of Andor goes for now, but I'm sure it's more
pricey.
Expensive than Castle Panic would be.
I agree.
Or Star Trek Panic, all the different panics.
Yes, absolutely. I think they've got a Munchkin Panic
and
now,
Zombie Panic, right?
Yeah. So
that's kind of where I sat on that one.
Yeah, it was cool. Another game I played, which I know you won't like because you're not a trick-taking fan.
Sorry.
But this is an old trick-taking game. It came out maybe 10 years ago. Was actually nominated for the Spiel des Jahres at one point. Didn't win. It's called David and Goliath. And the reason that it's called that is there's certainly artwork with the biblical David and Goliath type story art. But the cards range from I think 1 to 13 maybe, in 5 different suits, typical sort of card suits and everything else. But what's interesting about this game is when you play the game, everybody puts a card down. The lead card in that collar, everybody has to follow the collar of the suit, which is typical trick taking. If you don't have that collar, then you play any card you want. But then once all the cards are played, the color of the cards doesn't matter at all. All you care about then is the lowest card and the highest card. So the lowest card is David, and he beats Goliath, which is the highest card. So if you play the lowest card, you get to keep the highest card, put it in front of you. The highest card gets all the other cards that were played and puts it in front of them.
Oh.
Now, simple, right? But the fun part of this game is everybody has 15 cards, so you just play 15 rounds and you're done. But the cards in front of you are worth points, and the cards are worth the face value of those points in their suits, so long as you have 2 cards or less in that color. So if I for example had the 7 in red and the 5 in red, that'd be 12 points. But as soon as I take a 3rd red card, then every card's only worth 1 point.
Oh, man.
So the trick is you're trying to get other people to take more than 3 cards or more than 2 in a collar, and then you're trying to get,
So that's the reason you'd play your 13 or whatever.
Yes.
It's like, this person's probably going to win with his 2 red, and it's going to be his 3rd.
Yes.
Might as well throw my 13 out.
That's right. And then if you already are like, I've got 3 cards in these 3 colors, well, then you want to play the highest card because you're going to get every other card in the that was played that round, and then you're just accumulating points for every card you win. So it's a clever little trick taking game. It's very simple as far as rule set.
Yep.
And I get why they named David and Goliath. There's actually a newer printing that has like a little mice. Has like mice and rats, and as the cards progress, you start with a little mouse and it grows into a rat. So it's cute.
That's not scientific.
Yeah, not scientific at all.
Oh, wow.
But they cross species or whatever. But it's a fun game. It plays really well, anywhere from 3 to 6, and it's definitely a trick taking game you can introduce to people who are used to playing like hearts or spades or whatever. So I really liked it. That was David and Goliath.
So I've played 2 plays now of the new In Too Deep, which was that Kickstarter received. I did an unboxing for it, and it's a very sci-fi, cyberpunk thing where there's criminals doing nefarious things in the city, and we are players are a secret organization where they work together. But again, it's competitive. But you're able to go into the criminals' minds by hooking into them, and you're essentially able to sort of manipulate where they are and what items they're using and that sort of stuff. And it's all about trying to position the criminals and the items and stuff like that on the map to complete story crime cards. And you're also collecting evidence, and there's this balance of when you complete those crimes, you can either do it the reckless way, which is more points, but you also have to draw a lot more dilemma cards, which can increase your corruption score, or less points and more evidence, which then you could help foil the plot easier and maybe get more points that way. Essentially, the highest value corruption score at the end of the game is going to lose that many points if the plot was foiled, and that's when a certain set of 3 of a certain number of types of evidence is filed. And so throughout the game, you're forced to file evidence onto this plot board. And if there's, I think, let's say 3 players, then you need, I want to say 4 different types of evidence, 3 of each. And if that's all in there, then the plot's foiled. And then that one player who has the highest corruption value loses that many points. So throughout the game, you're trying to keep an eye on how much evidence is being filed, even though you don't really get to know what they are, because you can file it face down into your personal locker. But there's a public area as well that has bonuses when you file there. But the downside is at the end of that chapter or that round, they get flipped face up. So you slowly give some information as to what types of tokens are there. It's really interesting. I liked it a lot. It's pretty thinky because you're constantly trying to move things around, and no one controls, no one is a criminal. No one is controlling a criminal. You can always hook into anybody you want and move them around. So you're constantly interacting and maybe even screwing up what someone else is trying to do.
Right.
And you don't really know because you've got these cards that you're completing. The other restriction with completing those cards is those story ones. There's levels 1s, 2s, and 3s. The level 2s and 3s can't be completed unless their prerequisite one has been done. And then that's where they get into like letters. So letter A, right? So if you have A2 or A3, the A1s and the A2s have to be done by anybody for you to be able to complete that card. It's just like a prerequisite because thematically that's a story of that crime. And so it's interesting because the first time we played it, it was 2 players and my opponent completely forgot about that part. And 2 different times,
Try to complete something.
he tried to complete something. He's like, all right, I did this. And then it's like, nah, there's not a prerequisite out for it. So he's like, oh my God, I hate this. So on my second play, it was 3 players. And I reminded people several times in the rule explanation, like, definitely check your prerequisites over and over, because if you decide to try to complete it and you spend a lot of time and effort getting it there and it's not done, you're hosed. There's nothing we can do about it.
Okay, that's interesting. This is it reminds me of like Inception or something, the movie.
A little bit, yeah. So it's pretty cool. I like the idea, the theme. It's got some pretty cool artwork to it. I'll probably end up doing a tutorial video for this one. Yeah,
I was interested in this when it came out. Never played it before, but definitely would be interested in playing this one.
It's pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds cool. A few more games I played. One is Runestones. This would definitely end up on a hidden gems type of video if we were going to do one of those,
or hidden runes,
or a podcast. Right, hidden Runestones. True. This is a deck building game. It's set in this sort of fantastical world. Obviously, runestones, and there's dwarves doing things and all this, but it's very, very much an abstract deck building game. In fact, the artist for this is the same artist as Bonfire.
Okay.
So if you know what Bonfire looks like with the gnomes and sort of that fantastical artwork, this game looks almost just like it. But obviously plays very differently. This is a lightweight, family style game. The interesting thing about this is it's sort of a deck builder, but it's also a deck deconstruction kind of game. And what I mean by that is typically with deck builders, you can buy cards from a market, add them to your hand. But each card can be played in 2 different ways. One is you have to always play cards of the same color, and cards have different like gems on them. And so if I play 2 cards that have 3 blue gems, then I can buy from the market. But you can only ever play cards that have the same color gems to buy from the market. And then they go in your discard pile just like any other deck builder. If you want to use the cards, though, for their abilities, each card has an ability, and you must play at least 2 cards, or actually only 2 cards for their abilities. And every card is numbered from like low numbers, in the 5, etc., all the way up to the hundreds. And so whichever of those 2 cards you play, when you play those abilities on the cards, the higher number card goes out of the game permanently. You're constantly looking at your hand, deciding, okay, if I play this along with this card, these 2 cards, and I get these things, I'm going to lose this card permanently. So sometimes you're trying to play cards that are a little bit suboptimal just so you can keep one of the cards and reuse it over and over again.
Yeah.
So it has a really unique mechanism like that. And ultimately what you're doing in collecting these gems is trading them in to get these artifacts that you trade in to get these rune stones, which give you special abilities and points and stuff like that. So really generic description of the game, but this is a lot of fun. And the first one to 65 points wins. So it's got a race element to it as well. Just a neat little game. Hasn't got a lot of buzz. It's a queen game. So if you're looking for a unique sort of deck builder, I definitely recommend Runestones.
Cool.
It is a lot of fun.
We also played together Dawn of Mankind, which has a similar in-game thing where as soon as someone gets to 65, 66 points, then that triggers the end. Yeah,
and the only difference there, too, is you never know in that game how many points anybody has.
Yeah,
Runestones, you're just typical
face
track.
Down.
Yeah,
right.
typical track.
And that's true. You never really know in that game, when it's going to end and how many turns you might still have left to try to get things done.
Yeah, plus at the end, I know you're going to describe the game a little bit, but I was going to say at the end, you could also earn more points. So just because you crack the total first doesn't mean you're going to win.
It's true.
Yeah.
Yeah, essentially you start out with like your little village, and you've got your guys that progress on these tracks from left to right, and they have sort of like Beyond the Sun, I think, has a similar sort of track type progression where depending on which action you kind of move them to, you take the action and then they sit there until you take a rest action to reset them, or someone comes in behind you and kicks you off, which then you can use them again.
Right,
And they have to go and follow one of these pathways. Usually it's either the one in front or like either one on left or right from that spot that we're at. And there's some places on that little transition period that if you take that path, you also get to like get another
tribe.
You increase your tribe. You get like another person, and they come in at the beginning of the track all the way to the left again, which is important because you want to be able to keep moving guys and doing actions and not take rest turns as much as possible.
Yep.
And but there's cards you can get to upgrade, so every action can get stronger. There's different ways to score extra bonus points at the end of the game, and there's ways when moving your guy to the final part of the branch, like at the very end of the board, you can drop or pay certain expense type stuff for completing these cards
art or something.
Yeah,
like
it's
that.
like
It's
artifacts.
Like artwork or artifacts.
Yeah, you can complete some of these artifacts for extra points there too. So sometimes you want a lot of things going at the beginning to get some early resources, and then at the end like use some guys to try to complete some artifacts. It's pretty smooth. I think it looks all right. Plays pretty fast.
It's fine. It's a little game, small box.
Small.
Little. I think
small footprint.
Definitely thinkier than what it looks like.
Right.
It's definitely.
I think it's just as much of a strategy game that you would want out of a short, small box game.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I think it's a lot of fun for what it is.
Yeah, and 30 minutes maybe, something like that.
Yeah, so that was cool.
Yeah, it was fine. Yeah, I had a good time playing it.
Do you want to talk about Dreamscape?
Yeah. We just played it.
So I just introduced him to Dreamscape, and this is one that I'd been looking for a while, and a friend of mine has it and introduced it to me. That's how I played it. But now I have a copy, and my copy it's French, but it's very language independent as far as the game goes. Everything's done with iconography. During the game, you're collecting discs of various colors that represent different terrain that you can put into your own Dreamscape, which is your own personal board, which is like a round area that has hexes or
they're circles, but they're kind of in a hex.
But they're in a hex pattern, right?
Yep.
And so you have to move your Dreamer, which is a little piece of yours in that to position him, as well as build up the different landscapes and patterns and orientations and stacks, different levels to complete landscape or Dreamscape cards. And when you complete a card, you get points, and then you get to draw a new card. And there's special actions that you can take from the main board where you're moving your main Dreamer around, and whenever you're on one of the main 6 spots, you can flip your initiative token to do that location's power. And so you only get one of those per turn, but you get 4 actions, and you're basically just moving around trying to collect discs. But there's some cool little things that not only the special actions, but just movement is interesting because as you collect discs, you can get free movement to other adjacent places if the first disc in that new location matches the color of one you've already collected. And also the cards that you collect that you're either trying to complete or ones you've already completed have actions on them available too, that you can spend any discs in your hand on them to do those actions.
Yep.
So there is a lot of strategy and thinkiness going on as you play, but I still wouldn't put it past a medium weight level.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
It's
and something that just dawned on me that I didn't think of when we were playing it is if you've played the game Reef, where you have to complete cards based on sort of the spatial positioning of the different pieces of the reef in your collection. Very similar to that, where you have the height matters, the positioning of the different what are they called? Shards or
coral?
No, sorry. In Dreamscape, was it shards? Shards. Okay.
Yeah.
These dream shards matters, and that makes it a really interesting puzzle. Plus, there's this sort of
there's ways to move things around.
Yeah.
There's ways to move discs off of the thing back into your hand.
Yep.
And then you can draw random stuff out of the bag. You can also draw a couple to add more to the board. So there's a lot of different ways to manipulate the game board and your personal board.
Yeah.
And you're constantly trying to like puzzle out and think the best, most efficient way to use the discs you've collected to, you know, solve these different patterns.
Yeah. Plus, each of the discs is kind of has its own special ability too, that you can trade in for certain things. It was a cool game. The artwork is really, really nice. It's
it's like a watercolor look.
Yeah, watercolor. I really felt it looked a lot in a way like Feudum, but sort of a little more Alice in Wonderland style. But
more dreamy than Fantasy World.
Yeah. But the components are excellent. I mean, they're really, really nice, chunky wooden pieces. It looks really nice. Your dreamscape looks really cool when you're done with it. This was a fun game. Thanks for teaching that to me.
Yeah, I'm happy too, and I just hope it gets more love in the United States, because it doesn't have any distribution here. And after the Kickstarter kind of delivered to everybody, it's just not been out. So the only way to get it is in Europe, or buy it and ship it from Europe.
Right.
You know. So I was lucky to find someone in the U.S. that was selling it, and again, it was the French version, but it has the English rulebook, and nothing in the game requires you to read the text. It's all
it's
icons.
very clear. The iconography is simple, and I like it. I like
that
it.
game.
So another one for me. Again, I tend to play a lot of family style games. This is a game called Pictures, which actually won the Spiel des Jahres.
I did hear about that one.
Yeah,
it's been on my wish list of ones to try.
Yeah, it's when I first heard of this, I said it didn't seem interesting. It's kind of a party game, but think of it more like a party game along the lines of like a Code Names, where it's a little bit more of a thinky party game in a way. But what you're doing is there are 5 different things that you're going to be manipulating in the game. And let me take a step back. So what happens is you have a deck of cards that all have different pictures on them. And so you lay these pictures out in a grid, like a square grid, I don't know, 4x4 or 5x5, something like that.
All different pictures?
All different pictures, yeah. Sailboats, lighthouses, all this kind of stuff.
Okay.
And it's not, it's like actual pictures of things. It's not, like Dixit artwork or anything like that.
Okay.
And then everybody has this collection of objects in front of them. And so one of the objects is like 3 shoelaces, black shoelaces. Another one is like some stones and some sticks. Somebody else has a deck of these cards that have these kind of abstract symbology on them. Then there's another set that has, I'm just blanking on it. There's some other pieces that you can use to manipulate. There's like a grid of like 9 in a square that you have these colored cubes that you place in the square. And what you're trying to do is you each secretly are assigned a picture in this grid. And so you're trying to make these objects in front of you arranged in a way that matches the picture.
Now, these objects, are these physical objects?
Yeah, they're physical objects.
Like they threw in like all these things in the box?
Yeah, in the box.
No way.
So like actual rocks. There's actually rocks and sticks in this box. So for example, let's say you have
what are the component lists for this game?
Yeah, let's say you have a sailboat, right? The picture is a sailboat. Nobody knows you have the sailboat. So you're going to have to like use these like 5 rocks and a couple sticks to kind of arrange them in a way that looks like a sailboat. And then everybody's going to vote on what they think your picture is. And then you get points based on how many people guess your picture and stuff. And it's really a clever, fun party style game that has a lot of laughs, because you're like, no, it absolutely does not look like that. It looks like this. Because some of the pictures are tough. Like, you got a lighthouse and then you've got a candle. Like, how do you distinguish between those two in a way with just like with 3 shoestrings? So it's fun. It's harder than you think it is. And especially with
sounds hard.
The hardest one for me was the one that you have this grid that can hold 9 cubes, and the cubes you have are different colors, and you have to basically make almost like pixel art of the picture and try to get them to guess. And and surprisingly, we did get it right a couple times.
Really?
But
with only 9.
With only 9 cubes.
That's amazing.
It's pretty wild. I think it's 9. It may be 12, but it's a very small amount, But it was a really fun game. And what happens is when you're done, you pass your objects to the next person, and then you get assigned another picture.
Wow.
And so so everybody basically gets a chance to describe this picture with these objects in front of them. And once everybody's had an equal turn with every object, game ends, and whoever has the most points wins. So,
I like the sound of that.
really cool game. If you've not heard of this one or checked it out, I think it's a really fun party game that plays 5 players or so. So that was Pictures.
Yeah, I have a couple I could talk about.
Yeah, go for it.
There's Vast, the Crystal Caverns.
Yeah, never played this one.
I know a lot of people are interested in how this one is. It's the same company that did Root, Leader Games, and it feels a lot like Root in a lot of ways. Not only the artwork and the asymmetry of the game, but I feel like it felt a little more complex than it should be. And I felt the same way about Root, but Root has a little bit more of a grace, I think, to it because people, I don't know, just it's been around longer for one.
Sure.
And just sort of it was unique in how it is. This feels like it's trying to be Root in a dungeon crawl. And I feel like it fell short a little bit for me. I would rather play Root over Vast. And we played it a 3-player game. So there was a knight, a dragon, and the goblin player. And the knight made sense. You just kind of walk around. You're trying to flip over tiles. Maybe you get treasure. Maybe you crush some crystals. You're trying to find the dragon and attack the dragon as much as you can and kill the dragon. The goblin player can spawn, these hordes of 3 types of goblin monsters on the different dark tiles, meaning they're not flipped over yet. And so those tiles are going to have one of those 3 symbols. And, so I'll get to see as the knight, okay, well, he's putting those there, or maybe on their turn, like they'll put it right in front of me or put me somewhere where they know that the dragon is and I'm trying to get there. They use a little disc to stack up the goblins. Then their object is to kill the knight, and then the dragon, they start asleep, which is weird, but you can still move them around. So it's not really like the asleep dragon. It's more like the groggy dragon. Like, it's weird.
Weird. Okay.
Like the dragon, even while asleep, can kill and eat goblins. But it's not really meant to win. It's just sort of doing that to unlock his, like some cubes from the sloth cubes so that he can wake up faster. Once he's awake, then he can like more easily destroy the cavern, and if it falls apart, then he wins, basically.
Okay, interesting.
It's really strange. I don't really keeping track of what everybody did and all the different ways they interact with each other. Just like Root was a little bit tricky, even considering how the components look, and just the fact that it starts with just your knight piece on a tile with 4 tiles adjacent. And you're like, oh, okay, we're just going to look around and like explore a dungeon. But it's like, no, not quite. Like the strategies on this was not readily apparent to us. And the player that was the dragon was like, I don't think I enjoyed being the dragon. Like I was asleep the whole time and, I just kept being attacked. And then the goblin player was doing so well at killing the knight or attacking the knight, like the dragon player was pretty much forced to help the knight, so that they didn't die. Because if the knight died, then the goblin player wins.
Interesting. So that is weird. That's definitely not like Root.
Weird.
Yeah.
And I think, I don't know. I felt a little bit, overall, it was a little clunky, a little bit too rules heavy for what it is.
Yeah.
It wants to be something heavier than I think it needed to be. And that's where I feel like it fell short a little.
Yeah, I had always been intrigued by the game because it was asymmetrical. And I heard you can even be the cave.
Right.
And the cave can win, which is weird.
Right.
So it was kind of just one of those quirky games that I was interested in. But then I played Root as well. I played Root twice.
Right.
And I think Root is a really cool game. It's one that if I had like the same players all the time,
sure,
I could definitely get into this game.
Yeah, I feel like the interactions between the characters in Root make more sense, and it's easier to remember, actually. But even after playing it once, like we're all still a little confused as to what we're really trying to do.
Yeah.
And I'm like, do I want to explore the cavern? Like, not really, because that means more goblins and traps might come out, and it's like, I'd rather just go chase the dragon. Then the dragon player is like, all right, well, if you hit me 5 times, that'll be it. And it's like, yeah, pretty much.
Yeah, interesting. I like I said, I think the drawback in those games where every plays is asymmetrical is teaching it is a nightmare, right? And
I mean, he was basically reading the rule book.
yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's like, at that point, I'd rather just play something
it's kind
else.
of it's a little too much work for me.
Right.
But
It's a lot of effort for what it was.
But
so
you know, you
I was a little disappointed.
might like it if you get the chance to play with the same people all the time. It might be a cool game. But
to me, it falls into a category like Feudum, where you got to spend the time and effort to really understand and know the game.
Yeah.
And if you can understand it and appreciate it for what it is and how it plays, then you'll like it. But for most people, it's going to be too much work and too little return.
Yeah. Yep. I get that. You know, the last one I wanted to mention is a game. I don't know if this may have won the Spiel des Jahres as well, or the Kinderspiel. It's called Luxor.
Such a fanboy.
Yeah, I really am. This is again another family weight game. And what you're doing is you're exploring. You have multiple explorers, and you're exploring the inside of a pyramid, trying to get to the inner chamber where there are these two sarcophagi or sarcophaguses, however you say it. And it's really just a track that you're going down, and you're trying to get your explorers as far as you can into the center to score points based on how far you get down the path. It's kind of similar to Lost Cities, the board game.
Right. I can see why you like it.
But the difference here is you have the hand of cards. You have 5 cards in your hand. You always have 5 cards. And you can only play the card that's either on the far left or far right. And so you'll play one of those 2 cards. So you only have 2 choices. And you'll do things like you'll move, one of your explorers or 2, or you'll, pick up an artifact. You'll do different things. And then you can pick up new cards that you put in the middle of your hand of 5, which kind of pushes all the other cards out, out to the edges. And so depending on which card you play, that'll free up the next card that's available, etc. So it has a really interesting way of playing cards. Also, to collect artifacts, you have to have more than one of your explorers on that exact same tile. So in playing cards, you're trying to line up your explorers to all land on the same tile at the same time, because a tile that, say, requires 3 of your explorers to be on it will get you higher victory points at the end of the game. So it's a little bit of race, a little bit of set collection, and it also has some really clever card play. This one I've played a few times with the family, and it's a lot of fun. Even for a gamer, I think it's a good time, and it's light enough, but it has a lot of different ways to collect points that you can kind of win multiple ways. So I definitely recommend checking it out if you've not heard of Luxor. And thematically, the theme really comes through as well.
Nice.
And it's got cool artwork too. So
Nice.
that was the last new to me game.
Excellent. Do you want to move on to our topic of today?
Absolutely. You want to introduce it?
Yeah. So essentially, I want to talk about what it is to teach a board game, and the person, like, I think me and Jay typically are the people that are the ones teaching board games. And I want to talk about, like, what methods you like to use, or what you think is like a good general way. What about people who aren't, fully versed in the game, and that you need to, like, help them a little bit more. What's the best way to teach a board game? And let's just kind of delve into that topic.
Yeah, so I think the elephant in the room, right, is like this is what you do on your channel, is you teach games and you do tutorial, but
as a video.
And I think what you'd agree is that you will teach that same game completely differently to a group of people than you would on the tutorial, because in the tutorial, you're covering, like, every single rule, all the scenarios, everything else.
Right.
And that could be very different in the way you introduce that to actual people at a table. So do you agree with that?
Yeah, for sure. There's a lot of things you can get away with in person that you can't in a video. You have to be able, in a video at least, to cover everything in every possible way that it could be arranged in someone's game. But if you're setting it up and you're there, you don't have to explain everything necessarily. There are some things that you can kind of mention or give a general overview, and then maybe once that phase comes, or maybe once those items appear, those kinds of things, then you can explain those as you go, so that you get to the game faster. And that's one thing I try to do as often as I can. but knowing you have to know the game. I think that's the biggest thing.
Yes.
You have to read beforehand.
Yes.
And in person, definitely need to know your audience and what kind of experience level they have.
Yeah, and you're really hitting the bullet points. So
I mean, go
yeah,
for it.
I like I said, number one, you have to really know the game well, especially if it's a more complex game, and because it's certainly fine to refer to the rule book if you're looking at like powers on cards or special abilities, or things like that you can just easily reference. But when it comes to mechanically how the game plays, victory conditions, things like that, you got to know that really well.
Yeah, because they're going to be questions, right?
Yeah.
And you have to be able to answer them without searching the rule book every time.
Yes.
I mean, you might search it once or twice, or just to confirm something. But if you're in the rule book more than you're there talking and answering questions, then it's going to actually pull people out of what they're learning, and they're going to lose focus.
Totally agree.
So that's a big part.
Yeah, and I think to preface this, like just to give you an idea of our kind of background in this. So I ran a meetup for several years, and so I've taught games. I've taught hundreds of times to people, right? And you've definitely done the same, not just through video, but friends as well. So we've had a ton of opportunity to sort of refine our process in teaching games. And so some of the things I've learned and some of the sort of pitfalls that I avoid as well have been really valuable. So like I said, one thing, know the game really well. Second is really know the audience. If I'm teaching Jared a game, I will literally assume he knows a lot of it already because he's familiar with board games. And so I will give him a real high level, quick, hit the major steps, and he'll figure out most of the other stuff along the way. Like I don't have to tell him how worker placement works, So I will teach to gamers. I will cover a game that I might take 20 minutes to teach to a new player in maybe 5 minutes or 10 minutes. So because I know the audience really well and it's comfortable and they can
there's certain common mechanisms or common tropes even that are used in most games. And so like deck building, you know that, this is your currency. Those are the cards available. That's really all you have to say.
This is what you do when you discard. When you need a card, you shuffle.
And just and by the way, when you purchase, does it go in my hand? Does it? No, it goes in your discard pile like normal, right? Because that's kind of the standard. So essentially it's like standard here, standard there. You really only have to end up pointing out the differences. And that's really why, teaching gamers is faster, just because there's a level of language and understanding that's already there.
It really is like you almost have a short code or short,
So you actually get to the game faster by playing with people that already know games and not necessarily played that game.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's number one. And when it comes to knowing the audience, I think the audience you need to care about the most are people who have not played many hobby games.
The newest player at the table.
Because for one, you don't want to taint their experience of modern games by a bad teach and turn them off to trying new stuff. And one of the things that I do is, and I will, for one thing, I won't introduce a medium type weight or higher game to a new player. Unless they've given me some indication that they're like super into trying something like that, or they're really analytical maybe.
Right. Interest is a big factor.
Yeah, interest is a big factor.
And commitment to learning and that kind of thing.
Yeah, but 99% of the time, I'm picking very gateway type games, Ticket to Ride, that kind of stuff. And what I'll do is the first thing I do is I talk about the theme. And I think you're a big proponent of this as well.
I am.
Because if you can associate, like if you can tell a story about what, you're kind of doing as you're acting out the game, that will also help them retain the information on those actions.
Right, because then they have something to latch on to instead of like all these seemingly random mechanisms and actions and things that are being told to them. But if there's no reference point to say like, oh, that is the same thing as going to the store, or that is like, hiring somebody or whatever for this job. Like, oh, that makes sense now. Like, so it's giving you a framework or giving players a framework to say this is why these things do that.
Yeah, and even in abstract games, I found that's helpful. Like, like Azul. Azul's a very much an abstract game. It's about tile laying, but just saying things like, if you can't use a tile, it's going to drop on the floor and break.
It's going to break,
and that's going to lose you points.
Right.
That can kind of help them remember that if they take a tile they can't use, it's going to cost them, negative
That's a
points.
great example because just the other day I was teaching a new player that game, Azul Stained Glass. Sintra. And I said the exact same thing.
Yeah.
I was like, we're making stained glass panes, right? And this completes, and this might flip over. But, you're taking this glass, and if you carry too much that you can't put on that glass, it's going to fall, it's going to break. So those get broken and put into this little garbage bin, and you get penalized, and that's why this goes down.
Yes.
They're like, oh, okay.
Yeah, and even games where maybe it's a card-based game, and you're trying to get like a higher value cards. I might say like if it's a game like Treasure Hunter, your cards are like different warriors and stuff. You might say, well, the higher the number, the stronger the warrior is, and so this number represents their strength. And you're trying to have the most strength in this area to win this.
It is harder as a teacher to bring theme into abstracts.
It is way harder.
But having experience and trying to at least relate something to someone is a skill set that is definitely useful as a teacher for board games. But games with theme are easier to teach because of that.
I agree. Especially if the mechanisms work really well with the theme of the game. And you just said something else, and that is preparation. So, I won't just like impromptu teach a game that I know really well. I will typically take, and it may not be that much time, but I'll typically take, a few minutes.
10 minutes.
10 minutes or so, just to kind of think through, okay, how am I going to walk them through the stages of this game in my mind? And then I'm going to kind of use that as my note card, to kind of follow in those steps.
Like I pulled out Azul. I went ahead and set it up on the table before they came over.
Yep.
And then I was like, sort of looking at it and going like, I kind of remember some of this. I'm just going to like reread this real quick and make sure I know that I can teach this again, right? To someone who hasn't ever seen this. And so, and that one's good because it's not a long rule book. And having any familiarity with the game, having played it already, is just going like, okay, I remember that. Okay, that makes sense. Okay, so a lot of times when I'm reviewing the rule book for a game I've already played, but I now need to teach, I'm looking at, what are the phase order? What are the actions? What are the free actions, if that sort of thing? What are
the little kind of corner cases that might
corner
trip you
cases,
up.
But also like what are other ways that you can score points? Sometimes there's little things. It's like, oh, and if you do this, you get a point.
Right.
Little things that you kind of forget after a year or two of not playing it, and you're like, oh yeah, I forget that when this happens, you either lose a point or you gain a point, and so those are little things I look for when I'm reviewing. Yeah,
totally. And another kind of along those same lines, when it comes to especially newer players, almost 99% of the time, I will not teach the entire game.
Right.
And what I mean by that is I will pretty much teach only like the minimum amount of information to get started in the game. So there's less things to remember. Everybody can start their turn and play. And then as a situation will come up, that's when I'll kind of pause during the game and say, okay, now when this happens, here's what's going to do. Because I find that, that even a simple game, like, I was going to say Takenoko, but that I actually think that's a little bit more than
you could if you just get with Azul, it's like now that the tiles are gone, now let's talk what happens next.
So even things like you said in Azul, the first person that kind of dips into the middle, is going to get a penalty type of thing.
Right. That's like a trigger that you can stop and pause and say, like, okay, does anyone remember, if I already mentioned it, what happens for the first time someone does this?
Right. So those are ways so you can take those opportunities to either reiterate a rule that you've already said, but they've not seen happen, or introduce a new rule because of a scenario that happened that just came out. And more than likely, I probably teach maybe half of the game. Maybe half the game, and then the other half while we're playing. And in some cases, there may even be a rule or two that I'll omit, depending on how I see the players either struggling through it, or if they're kind of consistently asking me again to repeat something or whatever, obviously that could be a sign that you didn't teach it well. But it could also be that they just need to remember that. And so sometimes I won't add on to that. But then if we play the game again, then I'll add a little. Oh, and you can do this as well to get some extra points and stuff. So it's like things like end game scoring.
Sure.
I may not do that in Azul for the first playthrough if I find that they're kind of struggling with just getting the basic concepts of the game down.
So I think, and I totally get that. And this is also, I think, how much you teach at the beginning depends on the person and their experience level.
Yep.
First of all.
Yep.
But I would also say that for me, my technique is higher than that. I would teach more than half.
Up front, yeah.
I'd probably put 80 to 90% up front.
Okay.
Even if it's just top level. Like in-game scoring, I'll say, by the way, at the end, you'll get points for this, this, and this.
I see. Yeah.
Right. Just so they have a general idea of how you're going to get points or how you're going to score.
Yeah.
Because then it's like at the end, it's like, oh, if I had known that, I would have blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
I don't want that to happen necessarily, or at least not a lot.
Yeah.
So I want to at least say like, okay, at the very beginning, like, this is the flow. Then we're going to score some points doing these few things. And then now just look at this. These are the main actions you're doing. And then once we get to a transition, I'll remind you of the next steps.
Yeah. And I think that's another thing is providing a safety net for your players is really key. And what I mean by that is I'll often teach a concept and I'll say, but don't worry about this. When it happens, I'll remind you about this. So you don't have to remember this.
I even do that in the videos.
Yeah.
It's like, because some games are so interconnected with how they work.
Yeah.
It's like, well, I can't really go into all of that right now. But just know that this can happen here. And we'll get back to what that means in a little bit.
Right.
But for now, let's just focus on like this little section.
Yeah.
And then once you understand that section, I'll go into more detail.
Yeah.
And so you start real top level, then you sort of like reverse pyramid the thing.
Yeah, totally agree. And another thing I'll do too is, a lot of games have at the very end, when you're going through final like end game scoring, you'll get so many points for every 3 resources you have left or this kind of thing. A lot of times what I'll do is I won't teach that.
Yeah.
And then as I see the game getting like close to the end,
A few turns left.
yeah, then I'll say, oh, by the way, we're getting close into the game.
Because those are the moments you'll be thinking of that anyway.
Yes,
So
exactly.
as a gamer, you start to recognize like, okay, so I see the game's wrapping up. What kind of things do I need to be thinking of?
Yep.
I would totally agree. Pause right there and say, hey, you guys are going to want to start thinking about this because let's talk about final scoring.
Yep, exactly.
So that gives everyone sort of a fair chance and enough time to process so they totally have that opportunity to end the game strong.
Yeah, and I think, most of the time you'll find that your players will get into a rhythm and, a few turns in, everybody's kind of getting it. And then you can sort of layer in a little bit, layer in a little bit if there's something else. And what are your feelings? I think we're going to agree on most of this stuff, but what are your feelings about teaching strategy as part of the game?
So sometimes I'll throw some in there and sometimes not. But usually the ones where I'm throwing strategy in is like, it kind of explains why you're doing certain things.
Yeah.
It's like, well, you're going to want to play, you're going to play this when someone does this because this helps you here and it doesn't make sense to not do this or something.
Yeah.
So, and I'll actually pause the game and say, strategically, this is what you want to do right here with this. And because of that, I the first game or teaching a game, I'm hand holding, which is kind of how to overview all of this is hand holding and pausing, making sure they're okay with everything that's going on, checking in on them, making sure that everything that they're doing makes sense to them.
Yep.
Because sometimes they'll just do it because that's the only thing they remember.
Yes.
It's like, I just know that I can go there and I can do that. And they may not know why, they may not understand the strategy. So I'll check in occasionally and say like, so you remember you can also go over here, or you can also do this, or by the way, there's a better play if you do it here.
Yeah.
And they're like, really? I'm like, let me explain again and kind of reiterate some of that. And I'll throw in a little strategy just so that those rules solidify and come together.
Yeah.
And I'm helping others to win because I want them to enjoy it. I want them to get it.
Yes.
So that first play is truly a learning game. It's
totally. I never play competitive when I teach.
No.
I rarely win when I teach as well.
I rarely win when I don't teach.
Yeah, well, that's true for me too. But I think one of the key things you said too is helping and hand holding.
Hmm.
The way I kind of look at that is, there's a balance too in this, right? Because I want the players to feel like have agency over their decisions, and they make the decision they want to make, even if it's not optimal.
Hmm.
So I won't interrupt somebody and say, oh, well, instead of doing that, you could do this over here and get 3 resources that I want, and unless it's just something I feel they missed. Usually I'll let them make their own decisions and things like that. But one technique that I think we both use is, as I'm taking my turn, I'll actually verbalize what I'm doing.
Yeah, that's
So
great
I'll
point.
say, okay, I'm going to go here, and the reason I'm doing this is I'm looking at this card over here, and I know if I get these 2 resources, my next turn I can trade them in to get that thing, or I can go here to convert these to this, and then I can get that thing. So sort of talking to what I'm doing helps them to start thinking of, oh, well, maybe I should be thinking about that as well. And it's a way. To me, it's a gentler touch than singling out people, because I know sometimes at a game table, everybody's worried about, oh, I don't want to look like the dumb one. I don't want to be the one that's slower than everybody else.
And that can be crippling, and not only for their own gameplay, but like the anxiety, and it's like, oh, well, I didn't want to feel like the only one who didn't understand what was going on.
Yeah.
And then no one has a good time, because like half the people were just faking it.
Yeah.
And they just figured they'd figure it out by the end.
Yeah. And then I think
that's unfortunate. I don't think it needs to be that way.
Yeah. And I totally agree. And I think also that's something where, board games in themselves can attract introverts to the hobby, because it's a sorry, I'm just in my hat here. It's a way of sort of providing like a social lubricant to conversation, where you don't have to just sit there and like, oh, I gotta think of a subject and talk about it with you. I can actually do an activity together,
right?
And then sort of conversation will kind of arise organically. Sure. So I think you have to be very careful, especially in this hobby, of making sure you're not making anybody feel like they're targeted or singled out or anything like that.
Yeah, I think that's important as a teacher and just as a gamer, to remember that, I mean, everyone started out new, not knowing much of anything about what games are what, or what deck building even means. And we need to keep that in mind when we're teaching, but also playing with new people, so that they feel welcome to the hobby. Because if you remember the first few days, first times, first plays of games that you got together and learned, were those people welcoming? Did they take time to slow down and answer all your questions? And, try to remember that, because if you try to keep that in mind, I think that's a big part of what makes this hobby great. It's very welcoming. It's about getting together. It's about, sitting aside next to people, across from people, and engaging in a community activity that people enjoy.
Yeah, totally.
It's not something where it's anonymously online, where it's just you can do whatever you want and then you'll never see them again. I mean, like, you'll never have a game group if you treat people like they're objects, or like they're disposable, or your whatever, like your opponent and nothing else. Right. So, and personally, I don't play games just because of the fun of winning. Like, to me, that's not enough to stay doing this.
Yeah, that's like secondary. Yeah.
Right. Winning is fun, but that's not really why I play board games. And I think we need more of that attitude of like, let's get to know people, let's invite people in. And how can we do that as teachers? Very important is to give them grace, slow down, let them ask questions. Don't put any pressure on them to ask questions. Like, make sure, like, I mean, when I say checking in, is like, do you have any questions? Like, do you understand what you're doing right now? Because sometimes they're afraid to ask, but you can kind of tell that either they don't know or they look like they could be having questions. So I ask it for them. I'm like, hey, I want to make sure everyone understands this. Like, does that make sense? Like, I'm not trying to single them out. I'm trying to help them get their question answered that they may not understand. Yeah,
totally. I think you definitely need a lot of patience to be a good teacher. I think it's like sometimes
you should expect to lose. Because if you're doing a good job teaching, you shouldn't be also killing them in the process.
Right. Yeah, because that can also discourage them as well. If they don't, if it's a blowout.
It could happen. But my point is, if you're absolutely killing someone on a teaching game, that means that you're spending most of your energy on your own strategy
Yeah.
and not on helping them learn the game.
Right, right, and that's I think that's a key point. I think another thing too is don't be afraid to teach the rule more than once in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
So if what you're doing isn't connecting, sometimes, and I find this is very useful too, is I'll actually demonstrate on the board the action. So instead of just verbalizing the action, a lot of people are visual learners, and it helps for me to say, okay, you're going to place your person here and place it on the board.
Yep.
Now I'm going to go here and take these two things. And so just sort of showing them.
Even as simple as Azul, you can say like, okay, so it's my turn.
Yeah.
I'll just grab these 3 because that's one color. This slides to the middle.
Yeah.
I choose one of these. This one didn't fit, so I move the guy over. Then I can fill this in.
Yeah.
And now I'm done.
Right, exactly.
And just kind of walking them through. One thing I was going to say in general is, as a teacher, you're never not done teaching. Like throughout the whole game, you are teaching the whole game.
Yeah, you should really be 90% focused on everybody else's turn.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to your turn, just do the fastest thing.
Yeah.
Like don't because you want to be the one that's taking the turns the fastest.
Right.
In the
That's
game.
a good point.
Don't. I will avoid doing something that will hurt somebody else in a teaching game. So even though like I might be able to buy that card, like say Century Spice Road, I might have everything I need to buy that card, and I see that somebody else is like one cube away from buying the card. Yeah. I might do something intentionally to miss it because I want them to have the satisfaction of seeing this plan that they've built up over several turns happen.
For a new player like that, they shouldn't be automatically like penalized for being new to the game because they didn't maximize as efficiently as an experienced player does.
Yeah, like
I get that.
Even something like Ticket to Ride. Like I will purposely not try to cut somebody off in Ticket to Ride.
There's a level of politeness and also grace or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, and sometimes this is just an example popped in my head just now. I was playing Stone Age with some new players, and in Stone Age, you can buy different buildings, for different resource costs. And I had the choice. I could have bought one of 2 buildings. And I looked to see what the other players were doing. I knew one of the players was going to buy this one building, so I chose the other building. Now, I could have chosen the one he was going to buy, and he'd have been stuck. But for me, it's like that's the moment where it's like, hey, I want this game to be fun for you,
right?
And not frustrating.
Because that's why we get together, is to have fun. And if as the teacher, someone's not having fun, it's your responsibility to help them have fun.
Yeah, and after you've played a few more times, then you can go all in when they're proficient.
And that's fun too, because after the game, they're like, "Do you get it now?" And they're like, "Yeah, I get it. I'm ready to play now." And it's like, "You want to try again? Because now I can, we'll kick up the difficulty here." Right?
Totally agree.
That's always fun too.
Now, what have you found are pitfalls that you've learned to avoid, or some things that you have to kind of remind yourself when you're teaching as well? I got a couple I'm thinking of.
Pitfalls. I would say don't teach anything while someone's not at the table. Like if someone gets up to go get a drink or something like that,
right.
Just stop because you're gonna have to teach it again anyway, and you're gonna forget what you taught someone, and they're gonna miss something.
Yeah,
just stop.
I think one thing too is you have to be really careful of being overconfident in your knowledge of the game, and this kind of goes back to making sure you look at the rules of the game. I may have taught a game like Azul, let's say, a bunch of times. And so I'm like, I got this. I can go into this. And sometimes what you'll do is you'll end up, because you're so familiar with it and you know the game so well, you'll end up forgetting something that's really key to them understanding it, because you just, you're so used to it.
And that's a good point. You'll do it. Like you'll make the game happen. You'll run it perfectly, but you might not have explained everything that you're doing.
Right.
And that's where it's like, if try to imagine giving someone directions to your house from wherever you are, like you may not be able to remember every single turn, but you know how to get home.
Yeah.
And it's like, ooh, I have to actually sit down and think of how to communicate this.
Right.
And did I tell them to turn left there, or did I? Because there's every little thing that it takes to get from where you are to your house, that person will need to know. And, that's the same sort of concept here, is you can't really gloss over anything.
Yeah.
You have to cover all the things that you know are just off the back of your hand.
Yeah, and I don't know if it was maybe playing with you a few months ago. It was Takenoko.
Mm-hmm.
I was
The big version.
I don't know if it was. I think it was a game after that. I'm trying to think, but there were some rules that I had completely forgotten or that I hadn't remembered right when I was teaching that game. And I had to go back to the rule book and look it up. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's right. I forgot about this. And so just thinking like, I've played this game so many times. I know this cold. There might be that one little rule or something that you forget that could really affect another player. So
like
make sure you're
like
make
with
sure
the
you know
Chibis expansion, like when you move the panda to the female, then they don't have the baby. But only when the female moves to the male, they have the baby.
Oh, is that okay? So I haven't played that one very much, so that would have tripped me up probably too.
Because I recently taught that one and reread that.
Interesting.
Like,
interesting.
Don't forget that.
Yeah. So there's so that's one thing I think is just not being overconfident, and that goes into preparedness. Another thing that I've found.
Don't feel bad if you have to like actually like review the rules. Like you should review the rules even if you've played it 100 times.
Yeah, totally. Another thing that I'd say this is something that recently I've been doing more and more of, and that is I might just say, let's just play the first round of this game. You know, especially if it's a simple game, and I just say, okay, everybody do this. And I found that sometimes for certain games that are hard to sort of conceptualize, literally just playing a round of the game, a practice round, and saying just follow my lead can really help. And that can even be with experienced gamers, like Scythe, for example. Scythe is a game where you can literally teach it by just saying, okay, everybody's going to do this action. Now everybody do this action. And you can really go through like the first couple turns, having everybody do the exact same thing and teach them the majority of what they're going to be doing in that game. And then layer in rules as you go. Because that's a complex game. And we sometimes forget if we're, we've played it so many times that it can be really
And there are games too that even aren't rules heavy that are still conceptually hard to understand.
Yes.
I have an example of this where I was teaching a large group. There was 6 of us. We're playing Skull. And Skull is a game that you don't get it until you start playing.
100% agree.
You're like,
example.
Well, I have these discs, but I don't understand why I'm placing a disc.
Right.
Or I don't understand what I can really do and why I'm choosing a challenge number. That doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
So I let them play like 2 rounds with no no commitment to the game. We'll restart or whatever. But I want to make sure, because usually after 2 rounds, people are like, oh, okay, I see this now. Now we'll start over, because I don't want anyone to start crippled when they didn't really understand.
Yep. Another game like that is Mamma Mia. Simple little card game, but the concept of flipping the deck upside down and going through it backwards is just a weird thing if you've never seen that in a board game before or a card game. So yeah, those are really good tips, I think.
So I have a interesting teaching story from a session that happened just a couple weeks ago.
Okay.
I had brought The Thing, Infection and Outpost 31 to a game group on New Year's Day. And there were 6 of us. And it was a game that everyone was interested in when I showed it to them. But I had not prepared. All right. I've not played it. I've not read the rules.
Oh, no.
All I did was punch it out and sort it and all that stuff. Right. So it's like, it's playable if someone can teach it. But no one was there who could teach it. But everybody wanted to play. I was like, I could take 20 minutes and study this thing, or alternatively, I can read it aloud to everybody and we'll just read the rules together.
Yeah.
And that's what we did.
How did that work out? Because I will adamantly avoid that.
Yes.
Anytime that happens, I will avoid that.
I felt so bad because I'm like, I assume nobody would do that. I would assume they'd be like, nah, let's just play something else, because I don't want to have to sit here and read the rule book.
Right.
If you're at that point where you have to read the rule book in front of everybody, 9 times out of 10, don't do it and just play something else.
I agree. I'll know a game pretty well. And if somebody just asks me to play that game, a lot of times I'll say, you know what? I've played this game a lot, but it's been a while since I've played it. And for me to take the time to kind of go through and make sure I don't miss something important, time
is better spent to do it next time.
Just play a different game and prepare next time, because I don't know if that's ever gone well. Yeah, and I think another thing to keep in mind is I often think about what I felt like when I was first introduced to hobby games and how complex I felt games were that now to me would be really like gateway type games. And so I always try to keep that in mind, especially when, introducing games to new players.
I think one of the early ones that I thought was like really complicated was the Castles of Burgundy.
Yeah.
And I was like, wow, this is like killing my head.
Yeah, I remember thinking that of Seven Wonders.
Okay.
And that was one where I was like, wow, this is really, I can't keep all this straight.
Well, it's not Uno.
Yeah,
Like,
it's not Uno.
right.
And that's really, a lot of times, you're coming from sort of a whole different world of games when you're talking to people who've played Monopoly and Scrabble and stuff like that. I think another teaching tip to me is the game selection. So when, going along with kind of knowing your audience, if I know that somebody is interested as a new player and they really love word games like Scrabble or something like that, or they really like card games, a lot of times I'll try to pick a game that's similar to that. So I might find a word-based party game that to me maybe does Scrabble better. Or if they really like trivia games, I'll do like Wits and Wagers, or something like that. Or a card game, I'll do a card game that has a little bit more of a spin on a traditional, 52 card deck type game.
Sure. Something that is light enough that introduces like one or two new things to what they're already familiar with.
Yeah. Another thing too is, certain games I'll even avoid with teaching a new group, like we were just talking about The Thing, and like it being like Resistance. The Resistance can be a tough game to teach if there are people at the table who may be uncomfortable with bluffing or with lying to their friends, even
being accused
or
of
being
lying.
accused of lying.
I hate that.
So it's something where like for me, I love those types of games, and I love being able to like really trick my friends, and things like that. But that may not be a game that's going to work with everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes when you do a game where like it's one person has no information, but everybody else has information, and they have to sort of do something impromptu, that can be tough.
Yeah.
So a lot of times I'll avoid those kinds of games until I know the people a little bit better. And then maybe introduce them into, hidden role games and stuff like that.
I also want to mention too, before we kind of wrap this up a little bit, if there's a game that you're playing where there's either a GM role or a one versus many, you are that person. You're the one.
No question.
You're the one that's guiding the game. So you're that player, even if you didn't want to be. Like, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Like, you're the zombies. You're the bad guys. You're Dracula. Like, that's what it is.
Yeah. The person who knows the game best should always take those roles, and that's
you're
also
the traitor if that's a possibility.
Yeah, that should also be something that you're going to be most likely teaching if you're that person.
You did ask about pitfalls. You had a couple you wanted to mention?
Yeah. The one was just not being overconfident. Okay. Remembering your background. I think another is selecting the right game for the right audience and making sure you're not interested. You're not. And another thing is making sure you're not kind of pushing your agenda on other players. So even though there may be a game that you really, really love, make sure that that's really the right game for the people you're playing with, because it may not be a game that they love or will love after you teach it. So, try to really be more selfless.
Or it might be too complex for them right now.
Sure.
They'll get there.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
There was another one I was thinking of, but it's kind of escaped my mind at the moment. I think too, it a lot of it really depends on the venue as well. Like you don't want to bring a game that has like an app-based game into a noisy area where people can't hear. You really want to set like the optimal conditions for when you teach the game. So you want to make sure you're free of distractions, you're not in a noisy area, all that kind of stuff. Because I think, and again, my experience is mostly with brand new players, so that's why I'm speaking to that. But I really try to, I want them to have the best experience possible when playing this game, because ultimately I want to be like an evangelist for the hobby. Well,
if you're teaching, then you are, right? I think that's an important distinction that you need to recognize. If you're teaching the games, then you are the person that person, whoever you're teaching, knows more about than anything. Like
Yeah.
they look to you as the expert because you're teaching.
Yeah.
And so you need to be the expert in all senses of the hobby because they're like, well, this is the guy that I go to for questions that knows games.
Yeah.
Even if that's the only game you teach and that's the one you know,
Yep.
like you're the expert to them. You have to be, on their level, explain it in a way, and also play it in a way that is enjoyable for them.
Yeah. Yeah. And,
You're the ambassador.
And yeah, I think the last point I'll make is sometimes it's good and it's fine to teach without actually playing.
Yeah.
And so, sometimes I'll be teaching, say, a 4-player game, and then somebody will come over and they're interested. And so I'll say, you know what, I won't play. I'll just teach you for the game, and then I'll just hang out with you the whole time, and I'll make sure that everybody knows what they're doing, and I'll keep track. So even though I'm not getting the sort of joy of playing the game myself, I get a lot of fulfillment just watching other people play, and just kind of being that guide for them. And for me, that's really what it's all about, right? When that person has that moment.
Yeah, and if you get good at that sort of thing, like at a convention, you might end up be teaching 3 or 4 tables at a time.
Yeah, and
that's happened to me.
Yeah. I've done that at meetup groups too, where I have like multiple copies of the game.
Yep.
And so I'll teach like 2 or 3 tables.
Yep.
And so I again,
a couple of years ago,
you got to build up to that, obviously, but yeah.
One of our local conventions, I had signed up and registered to teach Underwater Cities.
I cannot see, even with me, I cannot imagine teaching that to multiple tables.
3 tables.
That's crazy.
Yeah, 3 tables. So what is that? 4 times? So 11 players plus me.
Yeah.
And I did play. So we had 11 players that were looking to me for rules, and so I taught everybody on one table, and then let them go.
Yeah.
I'm like, you guys start now since we've already demonstrated. Let me set up the second game over here, or not set up. I mean, it's already been set up.
Yeah.
But the point is, like, let me get you guys started.
Yeah.
And then let me join my game, you know, and then get that started.
Yeah.
And then I would walk around when it wasn't my turn.
I was going to say, typically in that kind of a situation, I'll usually not be playing, and I'll just be kind of roaming. But
we
the tables,
were physically adjacent, like we were very
that
close.
Helps. That certainly helps. Yeah.
So I was able to manage that, and that way, no one actually really had to get up if they had a question.
Yeah.
They were like, "Hey, Jared, I have a question. What happens to this?" And I can either answer it, or I can get up and take a look, and then give them an answer.
Yeah.
But yeah, you can totally do that with multiple tables.
Yeah.
If you get good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. True.
Comfortable enough with the game, I guess.
Right. So yeah, this is a fun topic. And it's something that we do all the time. We don't really think of a lot of, because we've been doing it for several years. But
so I was thinking we should probably just cover it so that we can point someone to an episode and say, like, these are some things to look for if you're looking to become a good teacher at teaching board games, or things to look out for, bad or good, right?
Yeah, so. And if I could give a shout out to another channel.
Yeah, go ahead.
So Shut Up and Sit Down, is obviously a really popular YouTube channel for board games. They have a really good video on some rules for as a games teacher that summarizes a lot of the stuff we said. So that's another video I would definitely check out on how to teach a game effectively and teach a game well.
Yeah.
I think that's like a 20-minute video maybe, and really does a good concise job of sort of hitting a lot of the highlights. So highly recommend that.
Don't be afraid to repeat yourself. Don't be afraid to keep talking, like what's happening, explaining your turns. I mean, you can't over verbalize when you're teaching. Like the more the better for most of the time.
Yeah, I completely agree.
So thanks for tuning in to today's episode. We've had a lot of fun. I enjoyed talking about this and being able to share a little bit about like the games that we've been playing, because we don't always get to really just kind of talk about that. Usually it's kind of revolved around a list or that sort of thing. Yeah. But this is good. We might want to revisit just a little bit of like in the future, like with some games that you've been playing that you like, and
it's always fun to see what's kind of hitting the table, I think, and a lot of times those are games that aren't the new hotness, or they may be several years old or whatever, but they're new to us. So there's so many games out there. I think it's always fun to highlight a few that are sort of standouts.
Let us know in the comments what you've been playing recently, what you've most enjoyed, or maybe some disappointments that you were expecting to be really good and maybe kind of fell short. Like for me, it was Vast. Yeah. we'd love to hear, and we'll try to chime in and chat with you guys. So if you didn't know, this is a video version on the YouTube channel, Meeple Mentor, and you can also stream just the audio on anywhere you can stream a podcast. We're on Spotify, Apple, Google, all that stuff.
Yep. So until next episode, I have been Jay.
And I've been Jared.
Thanks for watching. Thanks for listening.
See you later.
Bye.